More Supreme Court fun for everybody. And when I say fun, I mean absolute potential disaster on the way. So Eric Rubin tweeted the following. He's a fellow at the Brennan Center. He says, breaking, SCOTUS will decide whether disarming people subject to a domestic violence restraining order is constitutional under the Second Amendment. This is a major stress test for the unprecedented historical analogical standard created in Bruin. He continues, the case is United States versus Rahimi, an appeal from the Fifth Circuit, which struck down the federal law prohibiting those subject to a domestic violence restraining order from possessing a gun, declaring it an outlier that our ancestors would never have accepted. Every court prior to Bruin had upheld it. All right, let me just pause to explain in more layman's terms what happened. As part of Biden's gun reform, which passed recently, I believe it's part of that law, there is, they close like the boyfriend loophole, as it's called. They allocate money for red flag laws on a state-by-state basis. Red flag laws, of course, is if somebody is acting psychotic and potentially violent, you get to legally take their guns for a period because they're a threat to everybody. So what they're saying here is there's a law that says if you have a domestic violence restraining order, then you can legally disarm those people because they have a domestic violence restraining order and they're a danger to their partner. That's the law. And a bunch of courts said, well, of course this is constitutional. Of course this is allowed. And then the previous court, the Fifth Circuit court that heard it, goes, actually it is unconstitutional. If you have a domestic violence restraining order, it is not constitutional for the government to temporarily take your guns. I mean, how do you even react to this? So the argument is, because of the Second Amendment, it is a right, if you are a domestic abuser, to still have your guns. It's a right for domestic abusers to have guns. Guys, the Second Amendment was written at a time when all that existed was muskets. So even the idea you have a right to a modern weapon is completely and utterly made up. The Founding Fathers could not have foreseen, all the modern weaponry. They couldn't have foreseen semi-automatic weapons or fully automatic weapons or various kinds of handguns or high-capacity magazines. It didn't exist back then. These things did not exist. Now, if you want to be very literal about the Second Amendment, because this is what the conservatives say they believe in, the plain-faced reading of the Constitution. We are originalists. Whatever the founders meant is what we go with. Yes. Very good, yeah. Really? That's what you believe? If that's what you believe, then you should be clear. Nobody has a right to anything except a musket. But let's go a step further. Because it's not just that. The text of the Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Everybody disregards this first part. A well-regulated militia. They use the word regulated right in the amendment about guns. So is it constitutional to regulate it? Oh, I don't think so. I think that's against the Second Amendment. It says regulated right in it, and it also mentions a militia. So are you part of a militia? If you're part of a militia, then you can have a gun if it's regulated, if the militia is regulated. But they make it seem like the word regulate is not in there, and they make it seem like they're not referring to a militia when they are referring to a militia. So the Fifth Circuit Court looked at this amendment, and they said, domestic abusers have a right to a gun, even if there's a domestic violence restraining order against said person. Can we call this what it is, man? Please, can we just be honest and call this what it is? This is the court being soft on crime. That's what it is. It's a conservative-leaning court going, we're going to be soft on crime. That's what we're going to do. There is no logical argument. There is no rational argument. There is no constitutional argument to say, yeah, domestic abusers should have a right to weapons, putting their partner in obvious danger. I'm sure there's statistics on this too, which demonstrate this very clearly. I mean, it's almost beyond comical. It's laughable what we're talking. This is laughable what we're talking about here. Now the Supreme Court is going to hear the case, and it's a very conservative court. Are they going to say it is a right for a domestic abuser to have a gun, even after there's a domestic violence restraining order? That's what the Second Amendment dictates. That's like, it's so made up. It's so read into the Second Amendment. It's so like you just taking your personal modern day politics and superimposing it onto what the amendment says, that these are activist judges. Is the same accusation that conservatives have about liberal judges. You guys are just activist judges. No, you're the activist judge. That's obvious. That is beyond obvious. And we're going to see if there's activist justices on the Supreme Court on this issue as well. We'll see. I don't know. But if you say you can't even do this mild gun regulation, then we just live in a totally, when it comes to guns, we're just fully like anarchist. Like anything goes, whatever, not even mild regulations are acceptable. I mean, look, and I'm not against the Second Amendment, right? Like, I'm fine with the Second Amendment. I think as a law-abiding citizen, you have a right to a weapon. But that doesn't mean you should allow high-capacity magazines. That doesn't mean you should allow assault weapons. That doesn't mean, you shouldn't have a testing process to prove that somebody can have a gun. That doesn't mean that you can't ban criminals or people who are paranoid schizophrenics or psychologically ill from having a weapon. We need to regulate this. This is obvious, and that is not against the Second Amendment. It says regulated in the goddamn amendment. Could you imagine seeing facts of a case about a domestic abuser, and there's domestic violence restraining order, and you as the court are going to go, actually, he has a right to his weapons. It's unconscionable and insanely idiotic. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.